This is a freestanding little refrigerator. Comes out of a camper van. It's got a little evaporator box in the top there, and there's the labels. Now this was made by Engel, and a lot of camper vans use this specific fridge. Now this fridge has a electronic module that runs the Engel compressor, and it has a little electronic device to control the temperature. Now this electronic board was faulty, and the compressor is still fine. If I run it on another power supply, it runs fine and freezes, but for some reason in South Africa we cannot get these electronic boards anymore. I sent the existing one in to be repaired and nobody seems to be able to do it. So this guy was desperate and he needs this little fridge in his camper van. He can't find one the exact same dimensions, and it needs to run off 12 volt and 220 volt. And I'll just show you what I've done now. I've made this little bracket and I've mounted this compressor on. It says Unitherm, but it's a copy of the Danfoss compressor. It's 12 or 24 volts. I've put a little power supply in here that gives 12 volts. I've used the existing Engel condenser there, and I'm running it off the power supply now. Temperature inside is 11 degrees. What I've done with the temperature controller, I've removed it and I've put a normal single door thermostat in. The wire for the thermostat comes out at the back where the suction and the capillary comes out, and I plug it into these bottom connections. So the compressor will cycle on the normal thermostat. I'll just have to calibrate it to the right temperature. We put 220 into our power supply and we get 12 volt out. Now this guy on his camper van, he wants a separate wire. He wants to use off 12 volt while he's driving, and he doesn't have the AC available. So I'm going to bring two wires out, but this is going to be permanently connected into the camper van. And if you have 12 volt and 220 volts going into the power supply at the same time, it causes a problem on the power supply. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a relay in. I'll show you later on once the relay is mounted. But this is how I modify these little Engel fridges. I've completed this now. I've mounted the little relay there. What this relay has is a 220 volt coil with two sets of contacts, a normally open and a normally close. And what I've done is the two wires on the right hand side is the coil, which is the 220 volt, which I've just connected onto the power supply in the same place where the mains go on. So when you plug the 220 volt in, it activates the coil, and also the power supply gets 220 volt. Now the cord to the compressor, these two top wires to the compressor, comes from the common contact on the relay, and then the normally open and normally close, I've used one side for the 12 volt from the power supply, and this is the 12 volt from the battery in the camper van. So there's no way that even though you have 12 volt connected and 220 at the same time, you won't get both onto the compressor or the power supply, because the relay will split it. The common wire goes to the compressor, and the normally open and normally closed either has 12 volt from the power supply or 12 volt from the battery. So the two are split inside the contactor, and it will always get preference on the 220 volt. If you have 12 volt connected and no 220 volt, the relay is open, so your compressor runs through these two wires. The minute you plug the 220 volt in, the contactor will allow the power supply's power to run the compressor, and the 12 volt from the battery won't work. And this is the job completed. It's running and cycling. There's a temperature on 7.5. I turned it on to maximum just now, and then it went down to -3. So I'm just going to run it on test, but this is how I convert these little fridges.